Hello friends, I am Welshie and welcome to Theory Pop. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favourite new animated shows to appear on Netflix, the brilliant 12 Forever. We'll be taking a look at one of the more interesting residents of Endless, but before we get to that, be warned that there will be spoilers ahead for 12 Forever. The island of Endless, where Reggie, Todd and Esther journey to escape reality and have amazing adventures, is filled with unique and eccentric characters. There's Galexander, who appears to be the embodiment of an entire galaxy, Darla, a tall woman with flowers for eyes and knives for hands, and Guy Pleasant, a man-corgi hybrid who also happens to be a rock star. The inhabitants of Endless all have their eccentricities, but there is one character whose behaviour sticks out as even more peculiar than the rest of them. I'm talking about Dr. Champion. Dr. Champion initially seems to fit right in with the denizens of Endless. He has a bold and bright design, appears to be a big fan of 12, and is often seen with the other Endless inhabitants. But as the series progresses, there are more and more indications that Dr. Champion doesn't quite fit in with the others. The reason for this is simple. Dr. Champion is human. This might sound like a bold claim to make. I mean, he doesn't really look human, with his green skin, pink eyes, and antennae protruding from his forehead. He's extremely loud and boisterous, with most of his speech being loud screaming, and it certainly appears that he may have been in Endless for as long as many of the other residents of this magical realm. But there is evidence that this wasn't always the case. First, let's address the issue of Dr. Champion's physical appearance, which doesn't exactly fit the design of the other humans we've seen in the show. However, we have seen what happens to humans that remain in Endless for extended periods. During the episode Spring Break Forever, while Reggie was stuck in the hospital, both Todd and Esther stayed in Endless for 5 days. While at first everything seemed perfectly fine, much like their usual shorter trips into Endless, events gradually took a darker turn. Their perception of time changed as they lost track of how long it had been between doing things on Endless.
Esther, care to carve some pumpkins with us?
Quick, before Colin eats them!
But we just did that, didn't we?
Oh, silly girl. That was 3 days ago.
3 days?
And not only were they losing track of how long they had been in Endless, they even began to forget basic things from their real lives, like Todd forgetting about his sisters. Eventually, when Reggie came to find them, they were acting crazy. They both appeared to completely lose their sense of reason and forgot who they were. What's more, Todd appeared to have shapeshifted into a creature form, and other than his face remaining the same, he barely looked human. But Todd and Esther were only in Endless for 5 days. What would happen with even longer exposure to Endless? Well, we've seen a character who is confirmed as a human that stayed in Endless for multiple years. In the episode Stranger Forever, the group meet Elmer, who claims to be an adventurer that wanders between islands. Later in the episode, it is revealed he is another human from Bethune, Iowa, the same town Reggie, Todd and Esther are from. Elmer had decided to live on Endless permanently after his mother passed away and he was sent to an orphanage. This is another character whose memories of his real life have been wiped clear by exposure to Endless, as he only remembers his past life in the real world when a photo of him with his mother falls from his diary. Elmer describes how his body began to deteriorate, changing to this action figure type form with detachable limbs. Elmer must have been in Endless for decades, as the photo is dated from 1955. It appears that humans can live in Endless indefinitely. Extended stays in this realm affects both their mind and bodies. Dr. Champion certainly could be another human affected in this way, but this is all just conjecture based on possible changes to his behaviour and physical form. We need to find more concrete evidence. And we have exactly that. In the episode Endless Forever, Todd and Esther decide to do some research into the very nature of Endless itself. They interview some of the island's residents, not really getting any straight answers until they get to Dr. Champion. Dr. Champion informs them that he was born in a Chicago suburb, before moving to Kentucky where he worked in a factory. He shows Esther his Kentucky driver's license, and, other than his photo, it actually looks incredibly accurate to the real-world counterpart of a Kentucky driver's license.
This looks legit.
I'm so confused.
We also learn a few details about Dr. Champion from this. It turns out Doctor is not a qualification or title, but is actually his first name, as it is not shown in the abbreviated format most IDs would be issued with. There are also indications as to Dr. Champion's appearance when he was fully human. He was 5 feet 3 inches tall and had black eyes. This is drastically different from his appearance on Endless, where he is substantially taller than Todd, Esther and Reggie, and has pink eyes. Dr. Champion likely visited Endless as a child, just as Reggie, Todd and Esther do, but his time in Endless has changed him. The driver's license isn't the only evidence of Dr. Champion's past life in the real world. In episode 13, The Locals Forever, Reggie, Esther and Todd start hunting a ghost in a ventilation system. However, they find themselves spying on the residents of Endless when they realise the vents connect to everyone's homes. They witness most of the residents living with housemates or partners and going about their daily lives. They all seem to live in comfortable homes that, at least from the limited view of the vents, appear to be fairly typical houses. All except Dr. Champion, the only character on Endless that appears homeless. Dr. Champion lives in a dilapidated area by himself, whereas most other characters on Endless appear to share their homes with someone else or have some kind of social life. What we see of Dr. Champion's life here doesn't quite mesh with the other inhabitants of Endless. Whereas their lives seem fuller and well-rounded when away from 12 and her friends, Dr. Champion feels more like he's an afterthought to this world. His home is run down, with only a broken TV and an oven that isn't even plugged in for furniture. The walls are covered with grime and the floor appears to be bare rock or concrete. Dr. Champion definitely doesn't feel like a native resident of Endless here. So after recording and actually beginning editing of this video, I actually remembered that Esther accidentally destroyed Dr. Champion's house in an earlier episode. So I don't think the argument that he's homeless within Endless still kind of holds up, but I do feel like his behaviour is still beyond what we would really expect from someone within Endless. And the fact that he's still the only person within this entire section who isn't actually shown interacting with another resident of Endless. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled theory. Something else that marks Dr. Champion as an outsider is his knowledge when compared to the other residents of Endless. In episode 9, School Forever, Reggie, Todd and Esther decide to start their own school and teach the inhabitants of Endless. Esther takes it upon herself to help them learn how to read, with everyone apparently being new to the concept of reading, with one notable exception. Dr. Champion is the only one on Endless who knows how to read. When Colin was having trouble with reading a passage out loud, Dr. Champion interrupted and completed it with ease. He even complains that the class isn't challenging enough. However, later in the episode, when Esther provides him with a more advanced book to read in order to challenge his ability better, Dr. Champion claims he can't read and begins to panic. We know that prolonged exposure to Endless can mess with a human's memories, but as with Elmer, certain triggers can cause those memories to resurface. Dr. Champion does know how to read, but the class is causing some of his human memories to resurface, which he doesn't know how to handle, which makes him act erratically and flee the class. It's also worth noting Dr. Champion's behaviour around Todd and Esther. During their spring break vacation on Endless, the two children begin to lose themselves as they embrace the magic of Endless. When Reggie arrived after her stay in the hospital, she found them behaving erratically, even to the point where Todd and Esther began barking like dogs. Only one other character barks along with them, Dr. Champion. This may be a similar reaction to the one he had when he first chose to remain on Endless, and certainly marks him out, as his behaviour reflects that of the humans who are losing themselves to the island. All of this points to Dr. Champion being a human that has remained on Endless for so long that he is physically and mentally changed. He has extensive knowledge of the real world, which most of the other denizens of Endless do not. His life on Endless doesn't appear to fit well with the other inhabitants, and he has a skill that none of the other Endless residents has, the ability to read. But that leaves one major question. Why would Dr. Champion choose to live on Endless in the first place? The answer to that may come from the story he told Todd and Esther. Dr. Champion mentions that, when he moved to Kentucky, he worked in a factory until hip problems forced him to leave his job. There's a couple of possibilities as to what happened. Either he developed a joint problem, such as arthritis, or he may have been injured on the job. If he did work in a factory, which can be a physically intensive job, either scenario is perfectly possible. Once Dr. Champion lost his job, he may have ended up homeless. As we see in The Locals Forever, he doesn't live in a particularly nice environment, which could be an indication of the situation he left in the real world. Dr. Champion likely visited Endless as a child, much as Reggie, Todd and Esther do, and, remembering this as an adult and at a low point in his life, chose to come to Endless permanently, just as Elmer did. Endless is a place for people from the real world to escape to, where they can forget the problems that affect their lives. Sometimes being able to take a breather from the real world is a good idea, but Dr. Champion shows just what can happen to someone that stays in Endless for too long. But what do you folks think? Is Dr. Champion another human that has stayed in Endless too long? Do you think the main trio will encounter other humans during their adventures? Let me know in the comments. Click subscribe to see more theories, and I'll see you next time.